um, a design trend defined by a book called High Tech, written in 1978 by Suzanne Slesset and Joel Cohn, who were two writers. They wrote the book really defining what they were seeing happening in design, which was more simple design, pared down modernism, and the use of industrial materials in furniture and in decorating. And in architecture, and High Tech was in architecture, but I'm going to show you more in interiors and objects. This, the Pompidou Center in Paris, which I showed you as the building that many people consider the first postmodern first postmodern building. Others consider it the first high-tech building. And it's high-tech in the sense of exposing the inner workings, like a building that has its exoskeleton. The skeleton is on the outside. It makes no attempt to conceal its workings. And that's part of what designers saw as the high-tech trend. High-tech sort of went along with what you did in loft interiors. And I'll show you some of that. This came about, the loft look came about in the early 80s. The loft law was passed in New York, which enabled people, which made it legal to live in Soho pools. Before that, Soho was manufactured buildings. Do you all know Soho? Sort of? Okay, it was mostly cast iron manufacturing. Not everything, but that. And these buildings were outdated. So a lot of them remained empty. Apparently Soho was a slum for a while. Artists started moving in illegally in the, I would guess, maybe the 60s or so. Artists, because they needed big spaces to work in. And there were these old elevated buildings. So illegally, not that they were squatters, but you weren't supposed to have a residence there. The loft laws were passed, which were permitting work residence. So if you were an artist and you could prove you were an artist, you were allowed to live in the space. A lot of people stretched the definitions of artists. And of course, nowadays, anybody could live there. And nowadays, you see new construction going up and it's saying loft apartments. And what they just mean is they're high ceilings, and maybe they don't have as many dividing walls. The feature of a loft is its open space. The real loft, and what gave rise to the need for a new kind of interior design, and these were among the pioneers of it. Alan Buxbaum, an architect who's not living any longer, he was one of the pioneers of the look. What do you do with a space like this that has, the industrial, the very tall windows in the cast iron buildings, have tin ceilings, have old wood floors? You don't really totally enclose this with walls and build an 18th century interior. You have to make do. You're not going to destroy the exterior. You can't put false windows in. So you have to work with what you have. And the way people solved the problem of working with this was dividing the space, keeping, the structural beams, by making decorative interest out of them, by using industrial materials. These are industrial light fixtures, by using things like you would set a table, or you would use laboratory beakers, laboratory glass, as for vases. That really goes with this kind of thing. If you put down carpets, you would take commercial carpet, which would be very flat pile, or carpet that looks like there's a lot of it around now and you take it for granted. Let's say this was industrial type carpet, but the original would be dark gray, very flat, maybe with grooves in it so that it would look like corduroy or crisscross pattern. People didn't use that for residences. They would use leather or very simple upholstery. You would put Bauhaus kind of furniture. You would put steel bases, and this would be a granite top. You'd have the kitchens open. You'd bring in glass brick which up until then, even it was used in glass Art Deco, but it was used in the exterior. You'd put glass brick for a wall to divide off your interior. So all of this may look very familiar to you now, but this was nothing like anything anybody had done before this. This Bromley Jacobson interior was done for a Kips Bay show house. And it was very radical. They used neon lighting. And they used this as crisscross room dividers. Oh, you would also, in the windows, you might use, up until then, people were using draperies. So here you'd use blinds, or you'd keep the windows bare, or you'd use vertical blinds. Minimalism was sort of a look, and again, a kind of trend, but not a style or a movement. Around the 90s, this went along with the law firm, but the key architect of minimalism, who's still around, is Tadeo Ando. And his most famous building, I would say, is the Church of the Light. It's a square, it's a slab of concrete. It's a box of concrete with the light cut in the shape of a cross. You open to the window that gives the message of what this is. The rest of it is very stark. This, and what happened in the afternoon, I didn't have time to change them. I put black backgrounds, and I forgot on a couple of the images to change the captions to white. So the caption doesn't show here. This is Ward Bennett. It's W-A-R-D B-E-N-N-E-T-T. This is very famous as a minimalist. He was probably the first minimalist interior designer who had a number of followers, and he was really he started in the 60s. He died about 10 years ago. He was 60s to 80s. This was his most famous interior, which was his own apartment at the Dakota building. Who knows the Dakota? Okay, the Dakota is apartment. It's a very medieval looking building on the corner, the south corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. Medieval, sort of Gothic, more Gothic looking. It was the first apartment house in New York, one of the first 2 apartment houses in New York, at a time when that was the middle of nowhere. It became very fashionable. Now it's a co-op. It's been a co-op for a long time. Very desired. Oh, it's where John Lennon was shot.
Oh.
I mean, actually, it's probably more famous for that. The top 2 floors, it's got like mansard roof, iron roofs. The top 2 levels were maids' rooms, and the maids' rooms, when it went co-op, he bought 2 of these, made a duplex out of it. And this is furnished with very low-slung black leather. This is industrial carpeting. He built, these are steel stairway, and the upper levels these are iron and marble top tables that he designed. And you see these strange windows kept totally open. Joe Durso, who is still alive, Joe Durso worked with and was kind of an acolyte, a disciple, a student of Ward Bennett's. And he designed this very widely published apartment. In 1975, you see now to us, doesn't this look perfectly fine today? It doesn't look weird, does it? I mean, at that point, it was radically different from anything people were looking at. This banquette seating around here, don't forget, not everybody liked the Bauhaus kind of pieces. These vertical blinds, it was highly polished lacquer walls, white lacquered walls, and these panels would rotate, so they were tall, wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling panels. They would rotate so that you could divide off part of the apartment when he had parties and wanted more privacy. And the ultimate minimalist architect is John Pawson, whose practice in London still does this kind of interior, which is really pared down. You don't see paintings on the wall, you don't see a lot of accessories, and mostly minimalist interiors are black and white, and maybe a little gray. I know one designer said, I'm trying to remember who it is, Juan Botero said, I was trained as a minimalist at Pratt, but he said, I really couldn't be a good minimalist because I like stuff too much. A real minimalist doesn't acquire things. And he said you have to be very disciplined. Discipline is a good word for minimalism. Ray Schabel now, they are retired. Schabel's in Mexico. Ray died last year. They were among the hot minimalist architects, and this is Ray's own apartment. And what you see is gray industrial carpeting, steps, upholstered steps. You don't see that anymore. That was around a lot in the 80s. You had multi-level apartments, and you see these if you go through any old decorating book. This, by Bryce Schabel, this was a Fifth Avenue duplex apartment. And the idea of the stairway being done this was a concrete stairway, and very strict, very high openings. They really sculpted the space. And this, I didn't mean to put this on twice, but Romley Jacobson with his partnership, Jacobson died. You probably don't know, in the 80s, the design industry was decimated by AIDS. It was a time when AIDS was first discovered. It was a disease discovered among gay men. And, dozens of designers, and prominent designers. And as I looked up designers, you find an awful lot of them died at the time, and well, it was a while before it was diagnosed, but the industry was really severely decimated. Anyway, Jacobson died. Romley is still in practice now as Bromley Calderi, and this is his loft. And I was in it a couple of years ago. It looks the same. He's redone things, but it is black tile, and it is way on the west side, open windows. This is a real loft, and lots of black leather upholstery. This was very radical at the time. Angelo Dagna, who's the person, he also died of AIDS in '85. And that was a time, and I tell you only because none of you know it, I had him included in a book I wrote and spoke to a cousin and said, is it okay to say that he died of AIDS? And she said, well, you say what you want, but all I can tell you is his mother has never mentioned that in her lifetime, and his mother was still alive. So I said, I don't have to. In other words, that was a time that nobody said what it was. Nobody said if they have it. There was I don't think there was testing for HIV positive, I'm not sure. But it was something that, nobody today appreciates the impact that this made in the design community. But anyway, Angelo, so as I said, unacknowledged, was one of the most celebrated designers of the 70s and 80s. And this apartment was really radical, partly because it was white, partly because Calvin Klein was known for luxurious, not that modern design. And, when you do something for a celebrity, I'd love to know whether the apartment looks this way now. I doubt that it does. But again, this was published in every magazine you can think of. Now, what did postmodern,